supersets, drop sets, giant sets, partial sets, all sorts of sets, S-E-T-S, unless you're mishearing me. Yes, welcome back to the Kmax. We're talking about sets, or more importantly, alternative overload techniques, which are expressed through sets and repetitions. Now, if you haven't already watched it, go back to the previous Kmax, which looks at repetitions and the application of that from a physiological, anatomical point of view, looking at what reps does for you with the increase of strength, increased muscle size, muscular endurance, and it attaches everything to the energy timeline and the energy systems and the different types of muscle fibers. And we're going to talk about that today, but not just limited to number of repetitions in a set, but how those repetitions are performed, whether they're partial or slow, or you add another weight or drop a weight or whatever it might be. Now, what's important today and how I like to share my maybe experience and my knowledge is I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to teach you how to think. So I'm going to go through a process that you can use based on anatomy, physiology, biomechanics, and apply that process to all forms of training techniques and training methods and alternative overload techniques or high intensity training methods, whatever they may be wrapped as, and be able to see through them from an anatomical point of view, and for you to evaluate it from an anatomical point of view, physiological point of view, and come up with your own evaluation rather than just hearing it from someone else and just believing it because they've got big biceps or they're a fitness guru or whoever they might be. I want you to be able to think for yourself and be a leader rather than a follower, which unfortunately there are a lot of them in the fitness profession and in life in general. So let's have a look at the different types of alternative overload techniques that you're going to be exposed to. And you're going to be exposed to more than this, but at least you can apply this same process, this same method to evaluate the true benefit. You know, is it giving you a bang for your buck, or is it misleading in what it promises to deliver? Are they over-promising and under-delivering from an anatomical point of view? Because the last thing you want to be doing is wasting your time doing a training technique that's not just, inefficient or ineffective, but it can actually hurt you. So when you evaluate any exercise, you have to look at it from the repetitions and the way those are performed from a physiological point of view, and we use the energy timeline. So to give you a very quick summary in less than a minute of the energy timeline. So when you work a muscle or place a muscle under load or tension and expresses work over a period of time, obviously the more work it has to express or perform, which means the more weight that you lift, the shorter the time period that you can lift it. You're going to fatigue faster carrying a heavy weight. So if I'm running around the block and I'm just wearing this jacket, then I can run quite freely. But if this jacket happens to weigh 50 kilograms, then I'm not going to be able to go as far as I would on a light jacket because I've just got more weight to bear, more weight to carry, and I'm going to fatigue faster. So generally the heavier the load relative to the maximum load you can lift, the less you can lift it in form of repetitions, means you're going to fatigue faster. So if you lift your maximal load, say a 1 RM, 1 repetition maximum weight that you can lift for 1 repetition, or you go to absolute potential, or you put your maximal force in and you lift the heaviest load you can for 1, then that's what we call MVC, maximum voluntary contraction. So that application of that energy expenditure and the energy you use is in the phosphate energy system. So the phosphate energy system is the first 10 seconds of maximal effort. First 10 seconds of maximal effort. So if you're fatiguing within 10 seconds where you can't lift the weight any more times, then you're in the phosphate energy system, and that uses ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and creatine phosphate as a form of fuel, which we covered very much in depth in the last session. That also, in that energy timeline, you're also activating what we call fast-twitch muscle fibers. Now, in that zone, that's where you're really expressing high amounts of force to develop strength and power. So if you want to get stronger, that's probably the area that you want to be in if you're training at an elite level. And a byproduct of increasing your strength over time means you also get it's not an exact relationship, but you also get an increase in muscle size once the neurological adaptations have taken place, and then the body starts to resort to laying down more muscle tissue, building your muscle fibers. You're actinomycin filaments, therefore you've got more contractile cross bridges between the two filaments, then they increases your amount of strength that you can express through increasing muscle size. Now, the further you go down the energy timeline, if the weight is light enough and you can keep going, then you're going into the lactate energy system, where you start to use a source of energy called glycogen that is broken down to replenish your ATP to keep enduring that force over a longer period of time. And you're going to get a byproduct of lactic acid, which basically means you're going down into the lactate energy system. Now, the further you go down the energy timeline, 2 minutes and further, the further you go down, the lower the load that you can lift. I mean, the less the load you can lift, because you have to lift it for a longer period of time, whether it be more repetitions or over a longer period of time. So now you're going into more muscular endurance, lactate endurance, and you're going to go more away from the fast-twitch muscle activation, more to activation of your intermediate fibers, your fast oxidative glycolytic, where your true fast-twitch fibers are called your fast glycolytic. And then if you keep going, you're going to go into the aerobic energy system, where you're activating your slow-twitch muscle fibers. So if you want to develop maximal strength and maximal force and maximal power and maximal muscle size, you want to be going as safely as you can to the phosphate energy system. So you might be doing repetitions of 1 for the elite powerlifters and the Olympic lifters, and you may go up to maybe 15 repetitions. It's going to take you into the lactate system, but it's going to be close enough to the phosphate system to get a carryover effect or a crossover effect to increasing strength, increasing power, increasing muscle size, and it's going to be safer because the absolute load that you lift is going to be less, but you're lifting it for more times. Therefore, it's going to be less stress on the joints, but more repetitions on the joints. So that's a very quick summary of the energy timeline, which we're going to be referring to when we look at different training methods that you're going to be exposed to. So whatever the training method it is, you always look at it and go, okay, how does this work physiologically? How does this work anatomically? And what is going to be the benefit of this? Is it going to be endurance or strength or power or muscle size or whatever it might be? And that's what we're going to look at today. So what I'm going to be doing is asking you questions based on your knowledge or the knowledge that you're going to gain from maybe watching my previous couple sessions. I did a session on the energy systems, then I did a session on repetitions and the energy systems. And today we're going to be looking at types of repetitions, or what we call alternative overload techniques, and how that affects the energy systems, and therefore you can determine what is going to be the metabolic byproduct and the benefit from that particular training method. So number one, when you look at any training methods, and there's plenty of them out there, and we'll go through each one and do a quick evaluation. But first of all, the method to evaluate any form of overload or alternative overload technique. The most important question is it safe? Because the number one rule as an exercise professional is you will not hurt your client. And what's the point of training or exercising if it's going to hurt you, that's going to take you out of training and exercise? So safety is of vital importance, because if you're injured, you can't do anything anyway. So when you look at any exercise or training alternative overload technique, just look at it from a common sense point of view. I always like to use common sense, which sometimes is not very common. However, sometimes it can lead to nonsense. So when you look at any exercise, look at it and says, does that look safe? If it makes you cringe looking at it, if you go, oh my gosh, what are they doing? If it's the O factor, oh my gosh, what are they doing? Or geez, if just looking at it hurts my joints, then it's probably not safe. There's a little warning, if you look at someone, if I go out there in car safety and I see someone driving around the roundabout and they use their blinker and they wait and they give way and they drive around safely, I don't have to be a genius to say, hey, they're being cautious, they're training safely, or they're driving safely, and they're going to get to where they want to be safely. If I see someone else doing donuts around the roundabout, they're flying and zig fishtailing around, it doesn't take a genius to say, well, that's probably not very safe. You may get to where you want to be. However, you're going to do maybe a bit of damage to the engine, you're going to wear out the tyres, and there's a high risk that you're going to end up in the gutter or colliding in with a tree. So use your common sense of a training method. If it looks wild and you go, oh my gosh, I don't know about that, then maybe be cautious about it and start to question it more before you start to participate in it. So here's some basic things to look at that could lead to that exercise being dangerous for you or unsafe for you, or it's going to hurt you. First of all, the look factor. If it looks, oh my God, then, hey, there's a clue. Then you can look further. Now, is the load that the person lifting, is it really, really heavy and they're struggling to lift it? It's a massive weight relative to them, because the massive weight for me may not be for you, because you're super strong and I'm just a mere mortal. However, relative, does it look like, oh my gosh, they're like, trying to lift it? And there's a clue that, yes, there might be some circumstances that you want to train someone to that level where they're training for an elite sport like powerlifting or Olympic lifting, where it really takes the extremes of exercise. But just because someone's, doesn't mean I look at a Formula One racer, they will push the car as fast as they can to the corner to the maximal speed they can, because they have to win the race. They acknowledge the risk, they minimise the risk, but there's still more risk than them doing that than me driving safely down the road. So just because they're doing it doesn't mean I'm going to do it, because A, my body's not made for it, or my car's not made for it, and B, that I don't have that level of skill or training that they have that will probably hurt me, but for them it's comfortable. So if the weight is really, really heavy, first of all, relative to their strength, then that's going to put a lot of stress on the joints, on the tendons, on the cartilage, on the ligaments, and they're the things that sustain your life. Because remember, as you get older, as I am of vintage, the muscles are fine. My muscles are 20-year-old muscles. They may not be as big as they were when I was 20. However, my tendons and my joints and my ligaments and my cartilage and my meniscus, they're pretty well worn because they don't recover so well. So the limiting factor for me is those jointy type pains, osteoarthritis and those types of areas, inflammation or the itises. So the muscles are fine, but you've got to really protect your joints, because they're the things that will probably start to wear out. Your muscles don't tend to wear out because they have a good blood supply and they're very active tissue and they recover very well. Where, however, joints, jointy type tissues don't recover as well. And if you keep wearing them out, then they can get to the stage where they're going to be not irreplaceable. I know you can replace hips and stuff now, but you want to keep your natural one if you possibly can, but they're not going to recover as well, particularly when you get down to lots of scar tissue and that being developed. So my point being is, if the weight looks really heavy and you say, hey, that's really going to hurt my joints, then they're probably not safe for you. Even though it may be safe for a powerlifter, but even those elite athletes later on in life, they're full of injuries. Why? Because I know many of them, many of my friends and fellow, world champions, Olympians in their sport, gymnasts, whatever they might be, in their later years, their joints are wearing out, even though they were elitely trained. But they still pay the consequences of that training and that level of performance that they performed at. The other thing is, if the weight is, when you're lifting the weight, are you in control of the weight, or is the weight in control of you? Now, this is a great test that you can apply. If you're in control of the weight, it means that any time through the repetitions you can stop the weight. But if at any time through the repetition that you can't stop the weight and you rely on momentum or bouncing off your chest or momentum to get it up, then now you're not in control of the weight. Now, one of my mentors and old friends of mine, Michael Burke, taught me that lesson. He says the best way to evaluate whether you have, if it's safe, is if you can control the weight. It means that any time you can stop it, and it may take a bit of effort to stop it, but you're not using that bouncing, or you're not swinging the weight. If you're swinging and using momentum and bouncing it and using that ballistic properties with a weight, then the weight plus that acceleration and change of direction is going to express a high amount of force and stress across the joints, particularly in those points of change of direction. So understand, some athletes might use what we call plyometrics and ballistic weight training and dynamic weight training, one of the areas that I did my master's degree on, and they prepared to take the risk because obviously their sport involves that type of performance, using momentum and trying to activate the stretch reflex, or what we call the myasthenic reflex, and to get those fast muscle fibers performing at a maximal level. But for the average person who's training for health and well-being, or your sport may not require that type of stress. Like if you're a swimmer, you don't require that type of training because your environment in your sport is not like that. So if the exercise uses momentum or big changes of direction, or bouncing techniques, dynamic techniques, ballistic techniques with a weight, then there's a clue. That's a big warning sign that it's probably unsafe, because if something goes wrong, then you don't have time to correct it because the weight's in control of you, and all of a sudden you've hurt yourself. You've crashed into the gutter like the person who is spinning his car, doing fishtailing up, and all of a sudden they lose control and they go off the road. Well, they're not in control of their car, the car's in control of them. You're not in control of the weight's in control of you, so your body may end up in the ditch later on. So there's another little tip when you're looking at safety. The other thing to look at is the alignment of the load. Now, is the load being applied to the body in its natural way? So joints are designed to, and they're beautifully designed. They're designed for compression. They can handle compression. They can handle traction. So because they're aligned so beautifully in their biomechanical structure. They're not always so much designed for forces going across the joint or rotational forces through the joint. Now they can do that by all means, and they do that normally when you're lifting loads which are light, that it requires force going across the joint, like throwing something, throwing a spear, throwing a rock, as we did back in hunter-and-gatherer days. But they're designed to do that, but not necessarily at a high repetition, not continually always throwing, or doing it with a weight. So when you do an exercise that puts the load across the joint, or makes the joint rotate, then I want you to imagine this. Imagine that if I've got my two hands, this is one bone, this is an adjoining bone, and if I push them together, no challenge at all. I don't hurt anything. If I put them apart in that direct alignment, no challenge at all. If I do this, if you do this to your hand, within seconds you feel heat. Heat is friction, and that's going to that's wearing out. Imagine that's like a sandpaper, and it's just wearing out. If I get sandpaper on wood, I've got sandpaper on wood and I push down on the wood, the sandpaper is not going to wear out the wood. If I pull up from the wood, it's not going to wear out the wood. But if I go across the wood like that with sandpaper, it's going to wear out the wood. So when you apply loads across a joint, and they're mostly expressed in exercises such as isolated exercises like leg extensions, where the load goes across the joint, not through. Where a squat, it goes through the joint. Where leg extension, the load's at the distal end of your tibia, and you're lifting up this way, and that's putting the load across the joint. So the two bony surfaces are going to start to do this. They're going to slide across each other. Maybe in a minimal amount, but it doesn't need a lot. Doesn't matter how little it is. If it's doing that with load on a continual basis, it's going to be, if I get a piece of sandpaper and I just do little movements like this, you can hardly see the movement. It's still going to wear out the wood. So even though it's not exaggerated, it's still going to have that wearing effect. And remember, this could wear out over 5, 10, 20 years, but once it's worn out, many times it's unrecoverable. It's not like you can get it back again. So just be careful that when you pick the different exercises that put loads across the joint, in repetitively with a load, a lot of isolated exercises, bicep curls, leg extensions, front raises, side raises, even crunches, those types of things. They put loads across the joint in your lumbar spine, your lower back, the prime area for injury. Or it involves rotation, where the bones have to rotate, still have a shearing effect and a rotational shearing effect. So if you're lifting loads and you're rotating with loads, rotating and doing that with a load, then that's going to accelerate the wear and tear of the joint. Now, some people at an extreme level will justify it through the sports that they do. I'd argue that, hey, you get enough wear and tear in the sport, why are you accelerating those potential sport-specific injuries in the gym? But that's another discussion. So, two are heavier loads, too heavy. Two is loads that apply forces across the joint or rotational forces. Anything that number 3, which is number 2, is using momentum. And number 4, putting your body in a biomechanical position that is not natural for itself where you're lifting a load. So you're lifting a load with poor posture. And for whatever reason, sometimes they put you in that poor posture, dysfunctional position. A lot of exercises are done in a very awkward position. They get you on the ground to do weird, mimicking an animal or something like that. But remember, I'm not a gorilla. I don't have the skeletal system of a gorilla or a monkey or a snail or whatever it might be. So why are you trying to mimic animal movements in my exercise program? Because I'm not an animal. I'm a Homo sapien. I stand in the upright position. I walk on 2 legs. So don't get me down in exercise positions a trendy name, hey, we're going to do gorilla walks or whatever it might be. Well, I'm not a gorilla. I don't have the architecture in my skeletal system as a gorilla. I don't have the joints of a gorilla. I don't have the musculature of a gorilla. So if I forced a monkey or a rabbit or a snail, a snake, or any animal, and try to force it to exercise in a human postural position, then it will probably cause a lot of discomfort and pain and eventual injury on them as well. So there's a nice little handful of things of how you can evaluate whether an exercise is safe before you start to apply any of these alternative overload techniques. So safety is number one, because if it's not safe, no matter what the benefit will give you, those benefits will be short-term, but you will be left with the long-term consequences of osteoarthritis or tendonitis or tendinopathy or osteitis or synoviitis, whatever it might be. And I've experienced a lot of them myself because I'm full of injuries from all the crazy things. Now, when I go through today and I look at these different exercises, yes, I've done them all. I've experimented more, and I particularly experimented when I didn't have the knowledge that I have now. So I have personal experience from the benefit or the minimal benefit which I was getting. I was getting maximal feeling. Wow, I feel the burn. I feel this is fantastic. This is different. But really, it was just the wrong different, and it wasn't the right different that led to the right result for me. And if anything, I'm paying for some of the consequences now because I'm riddled with lots of underlying injuries which I manage now. So, number one, safety. Now let's have a look at some other key things just to ask questions about, and more importantly I'm going to use examples of different alternative overload techniques so you can get a better understanding of them. So first of all, when you look at the set that you're doing, how many repetitions are you doing? So remember, the more repetitions you do, the more the stress is going down to the lactate and aerobic energy system. The less the repetitions, the more it closes down to the phosphate system, fast-twitch muscle activation. So when you look at it, says how many repetitions am I doing, and how does those repetitions, where does it place me on the energy timeline? Does it put me up close in the phosphate system, activating fast-twitch muscle fibers, getting good amounts of force and strength and all that bit, or does it place me further down the energy timeline, which is more lactate, slow-twitch muscle fibers? So how many repetitions am I doing? And the second one is how long, because the repetitions might be done slowly. So the next question is how long is the muscle under load? Now, the longer it's under load, the lighter load that you can lift. The less it's under load, the greater potential of weight that you can lift, because you don't have to lift it for as long. So how long is your muscles under load, under force, under tension for? And that will give you an indication of whether it's more strength orientated or whether it will be lactate endurance orientated. And then where does it place itself exactly on the energy timeline? If the set takes anywhere between 6 to maybe 12, 13, 14, 15 seconds to perform, then you know that's close to the phosphate energy system. If it's 1 or 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the more seconds it is, the more it goes down to the lactate energy system. So where's it placed on the energy timeline from a time point of view, using how many repetitions, so how long the muscle's under load, and where does it place itself on the energy timeline? And then where it's placed will activate fast-twitch muscle fibers, which are fibers that are activated when you express high amounts of force for a short period of time, or you're activating slow-twitch muscle fibers or intermediate fibers, which are expressing lower amounts of force for a longer period of time. So remember, if you want strength, you want muscle gain, you want to be activating the fast-twitch muscle fibers and some of the FOG or the intermediate fibers. And certainly you also will get activation of the slow twitch. So if you activate fast twitch, you're going to be activating the slow twitch anyway. But if you activate just a slow twitch, you're not going to activate the fast twitch, because the load's not going to be heavy enough to activate those fast twitch muscles that start a high expression of force in a short period of time. You're starting a car in third gear. You never actually, because you don't have to go fast. So I remember when I had a BMW, my first BMW, and my first gear, for some reason, it was a manual. In the first gear, the gear wouldn't go into first gear. And I got a quote to get it fixed, and the quote sort of, made me sort of like this. But I learned how to manage how to start the car, get it going in second gear rather than first gear. So I got around in second gear, so I wasn't accelerating very quickly. So if I'm at a red light and someone's behind me and the light went green, I didn't go off quickly. or they'll go, come on, who's this? This must be a slow driver. But it wasn't, I just didn't have a first gear. So I never really activated first gear, which is like activating the fast twitch muscle fibers. Down the track, I got a friend to actually fix it for me, and then I could activate that. So if the load is low and you're going to lift it for a long period of time, you never actually activate those fast twitch muscle fibers, which, as we shared in the last session, are really important for lifestyle, because they're the ones that stop you from falling over or catching something or lifting something heavy and all that type of thing. So are they activating fast twitch or activating slow twitch muscle fibers? And does the training technique, does it force you to increase the load, means it's set up so you can lift heavier loads, or because you have to endure it, does the load decrease? So if the load's decreasing, means I have to do lots of repetitions, or I have to do it a long time under tension, means the load's decreasing. Now if the load that you're lifting is decreasing, then that means the force on the muscle that's lifting the load is also decreasing. So decreased load, you're going to decrease in force. And if you get a decrease in force, that means the muscle doesn't have to produce as high amount of force. It can produce a low amount of force for a longer period of time. So you're activating the slow twitch muscle fibers that have ability to endure, keep lifting at low levels of force for a longer period of time, but you're never going to activate those fast twitch muscle fibers. So if the training method actually forces you to decrease the load because of the duration of the load, or the speed of the load, or the way the load's been set, or the set's been set up, then the load's coming down, the force is going down, which means the muscle doesn't have to generate a high amount of force, which means it doesn't have to activate as many motor units. So the motor units basically determine how many muscle fibers are activated. So ultimately, if you're activating less motor units, you're activating less muscle fibers, but you're activating those same muscle fibers more often to endure. You're never activating the fast twitch muscle fibers, because you're not activating the fast twitch motor units, because each motor unit are set in whether they're fast twitch motor unit, or whether they're slow twitch motor unit, or intermediate motor unit, which is FOG fibers. So basically what you're always doing is you're never activating the high force fast twitch muscle fiber motor units, because the load's too low. So the load's low, basically the force is going to be low, the muscle force is going to be low, the number of motor units activated is going to be low, the amount of tension on the muscle is going to be low. It means it's lower tension for a longer period of time. Therefore, ultimately, it's going to, if you're training for strength, or if you're training for endurance, then that's perfectly fine. But if you're training for strength, or really increase your metabolism, or increase your muscle density, or increase your strength, or increase your bit of muscle size to change your body shape, if you really stimulate a physiological change, then you're probably better off up at the fast twitch motor fiber end and the phosphate end of training, rather than the endurance end, which is the slow twitch muscle fibers, lactate, aerobic energy systems, which you get a metabolic burn, which means if you go down the endurance path, high repetitions, long tension, you're going to get, because you're in the lactate system, you're going to get a build-up of a byproduct, a metabolic byproduct called lactic acid. And that lactic acid can give you the feeling that, hey, I can feel this burning sensation in my muscles, and you can misinterpret that as building muscle, or exploding fat cells, or splitting muscle fibers. But all that is a byproduct of more endurance type training. So the more lactic acid that you're feeling, the burn in the muscle, then the less force the muscle is generating, means you're activating less muscle fibers, you're not in the phosphate energy system, you're more down the other end of the energy timeline, because you're getting that metabolic byproduct of lactic acid. And overall, if you look at the training, is it more conducive to strength development, or really is it conducive to endurance? Endurance, you're going to get that burning sensation, and you're going to get that real, fatigue. You go, oh my gosh, and puffing. Well, the strength, you're not going to get that metabolic byproduct of lactic acid. You're not going to get that real fatigue where you're like, but you're going to get that little tingling. Well, wow, I've really activated those muscles, and you're still going to be still feeling reasonably fresh, but really stimulated. So there are the bunch of questions that we're going to use when you look at different overload techniques. Now, I'm not going to be able to go through every overload technique in the world, because most of them I probably haven't even heard of, because there's people out there thinking of new ways of doing things to get more attention on the Instagram or Facebook by doing crazier things. Because they're different doesn't mean they're better, doesn't mean they're anatomically, physiologically sound, because the purpose of today's session is not to give you the fish, but teach you how to fish for the truth. Don't believe what I say. I want you to believe the anatomy. One of my old favourite series I used to watch is called CSI, and they used to say, follow the evidence. Don't follow the suspect, or who you think it might be. Just follow the evidence, and that will take you down to the correct path. Or don't even believe the feeling, follow the evidence, which is the anatomy and physiology, and sometimes you can understand maybe the feeling that you're getting, the burn or whatever it might be, or the fatigue, then it's the wrong feeling that based on the outcome that you want. Okay, where are we going to start? Well, how about we start with what we call super slow sets. Super slow sets, sometimes these were quite popular in the 90s. I'm not sure they're floating around now. I do see lots of different things in gyms these days, and some I've never seen. But super sets or super slows or time under tension is basically where, instead of doing a traditional set, so I'm going to compare these to a normal traditional set. So let's say I do a set of 6 repetitions. So if I got my weight and I adjust the weight to a weight that I'm going to 6 repetitions at that weight is my potential, which means I can't do 7 even if I try. So a normal traditional set is, I'm going to use the dumbbell row as an example today. You can apply this to the bench press or the squat or whatever exercise it might be. So a traditional set naturally is 1, 2, and I get to 6, and as I get to 6 I'm like, and that's what we call a 6RM, means I can't do 7. Now it's not that you have to train to failure or fatigue. I like to call it to your potential. Potential means is that you train to the limit that you're capable of training to, means you trained your best. I like to use more positive vocabulary. And it does mean you have to train to the complete best. Sometimes, depending on, like when I train, and I get trained by my students regularly, and they say, how hard would you like to train out of 10? 10 is that means you can't do any more, even if you put a gun to your head. 1 means you did nothing. Well, if you want results or progressive results, the closer you go to 10, the more you're going to be pushing your body physiologically to create change. If I go for a walk, I'm not going to get fitter. If I go for a jog, I'm going to get a little bit fitter. If I go for a run, I'm going to get fitter again. If I really push it and I really get that heart rate out, the closer I go to my maximal heart rate, the greater the stimulus on the respiratory system and the muscular system and the cardiovascular system, and most important the hormonal system, that's going to force and drive all those physiological change to make you better for the next time. The slower you go, the less physiological change you're going to get. So when people go walking on the seashore, picking up seashells, looking at the sea, then I wouldn't call that training. I'd call that just moving, enjoying it, and that's not a bad thing. It's still a great thing. But the dog probably gets far more exercise because the dog's going shoo, shoo, get into the water and up and chasing the stick and running. The dog's getting the benefit. You're just getting a nice little relief from the crazy world that we live in. But if you did some big sprints up and down, then you're going to get that puffing, and that's going to create physiological change from a cardiovascular point of view. The same with weight training. If I'm going to lift a weight and I'm lifting like this and I get 8, 9, 10 and I stop, you can obviously see that I'm not nowhere near fatigue because my speed is quite easy. Now I wouldn't recommend doing it that fast, but I made that as a point to show that the weight is really low for my level of strength. But remember, the weight and strength is all relative to you. So that may be a very heavy weight for someone else, and it might be a super duper lightweight for someone else as well. It depends. But for me, it's a medium to light weight, but I'm using that so I can demonstrate. So the greater the weight that you can lift for those repetitions to your potential, the better. So when I train, for example, if someone asked me how hard do you train, from a strength training view, I train to about an 8. Now when I was young, I always went to 10, trying to push past that barrier to 11, always pushing the boundary. Challenge is some of the crazy things I did back then, which are some of the training methods I'm talking about now, have put me in a position now where I have to stop because of joint discomfort, not muscular discomfort. So muscular discomfort's fine. It's like when I'm driving my car, I'm going, I've got a beautiful car, it's a high performance car, and I can really hit it. And I came back from judo training yesterday through the mountains, and I was, and the engine was purring, and the speed was going up, and the engine was purring and growling and all that bit, but I knew there was no damage being done to it, and I could push it. But however, if I can hear rattle, 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 ting, 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 rattle, 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 la, 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 and all these odd sounds, then I know that maybe I'm going too far, because now I'm actually causing damage to the structure of the car, not just taking the engine to its potential. So the reason why I don't go to 10 now, because I feel the discomfort in the joints and the ligaments and the tendons, therefore only train to an 8. But you still train to an 8, you're still going to create some physiological stimulus, enough physiological stimulus to create a physiological change and progression. And I can still get stronger by training around 8 out of 10. So a standard set of repetitions, whether it be 6 or 7 or 8 or 10, probably anywhere between 8 to 12 is a good recommended amount. And the reason for that is because I don't have to try to cheat my way through it, or I have to use momentum. I can control the weight, and I can take my muscles to their potential where they can't do any more around the 8 to 12, and it's still on the energy timeline, which is close in that middle, is close enough to the phosphate system to get all those extra benefits of fast twitch muscle activation and activation of the phosphate energy system. And I'm still going to get a little bit of endurance, because I'm also going into the lactate system as well. So that's a standard set. So let's say I use a standard set of 6 RM, 6 repetition maximum, or 6 repetitions using your best effort or your best weight to your best potential. It means I fatigue at 6. Now what time my detention does, it gets you to slow each repetition down. So if I'm doing 6, instead of doing maybe 1 second up, 1 and 2. So 1 second up, 1 second down, 1 second up, 1 second down. That's probably a little bit faster than 1 second up. But at any time here, I can stop the weight, which means you can see I'm in control of the weight. I'm not sort of using momentum, or you see I'm not doing this like this, where the weight's obviously too heavy. I'm getting a good range, good functional range of movement on the weight. I'm in control of the weight through that range. And some exercises I may have to do a partial range because of injuries, I understand that. But you can see that I'm in control of it, and I can go to my potential around 6. Obviously I'd have to lift a heavier weight than this, but just imagine this is the weight for my potential. If I can do it super slow, I still do maybe 5 or 6 repetitions or 6 repetitions, but I do really, really slowly. So instead of doing normal speed, what I do is I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down, 2, 3, 4, 5, up, 2, 3, 4, 5, down, 2, 3, and I do 6 repetitions. Now, because I have to lift the weight for a longer period of time, even though it's the same repetitions, but more time per repetition, then obviously I'm going to have to drop the weight to endure over that time. So our normal set, if I say 1 second up, 1 second down, that's 2 seconds. If it's 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down, that's 10 seconds. So the set's going to go 5 times longer. So if I'm doing 1 second up, 1 second down, 6 seconds, that's 12 seconds. 6 times 2, 12. So if you look at the energy timeline, that puts me just on that 10-second edge of the phosphate energy system. So with that repetition range, I'm working probably around 80% of what we call MVC, maximum voluntary contraction, means the maximum weight I can lift for 1 repetition. The weight I'm lifting would be around about 80% of that. We know that from the science. Which means I'm going to get good strength development out of that. Research shows that. Now if I slow it down and put time under tension, because Trendy Turner, we've got to put your muscles under more tension, time under tension, more tension. It doesn't mean more tension. The tension itself is actually lower, but the time is longer. So time under tension doesn't mean more tension or high levels of force or more higher. It's actually less tension because I have to lower the load to go 10 times longer. Because now I'm going from a 12-second set now to a 60-second set, which takes me right into the lactate energy system, because the lactate energy system goes up to 2 minutes. So now I'm right in the middle of the lactate energy system. So I'm going away from fast twitch muscle activation. So if you look at this, we go through the process of evaluation. When you do the set, how many repetitions? It's the same repetitions. How long is the set? It's longer. It is 5 times longer. So it's a longer set. Therefore, where does that put that in the energy system? It puts it way into the lactate energy system, What does it do to the activation of fast twitch associates? It's way into the slow twitch range, away from the fast twitch range. What does it do to the weight? What do you have to do to the weight? You have to lower the weight to endure that 5 times increase in time. So the weight comes down. Therefore, if the weight's coming down, what's going to happen to the force? The force is coming down. The force is coming down. What's going to happen to the motor units? Recruitment. They're going to come down. You're going to recruit more slow twitch motor units, and you're going to recruit them over and over again to endure through. You're not going to, just because you're fatiguing doesn't mean your body goes back to activating fast twitch muscle fibers, because they won't get activated. They only get activated if you need to accelerate with a heavier load. So you're not going to activate them, you're just enduring the slow twitch smaller muscle fibers, because slow twitch muscle fibers are a lot smaller than big fast twitch muscle fibers. Therefore the load's coming down, the force is coming down, the motor units are coming down, the tension's coming down. Is it more conducive for strength or endurance? Well, obviously it's more conducive for slow controlled endurance. And it's super slow, which is wonderful, and it's very, very safe, I understand that. But it's not even reflective of daily life activities, unless you're a sloth or turtle or snail who moves very, very, very slow, because you're training muscles to move very, very slowly. And it's quite interesting that research also supports this. There was a research by a gentleman by the name of Keogh, who published it back in the late 90s, and he compared all different overload techniques to traditional weight training. And he found the alternative overload techniques, they didn't really increase in strength at all. They increased endurance, but they didn't increase strength. That goes back to muscle or training specificity. Means your outcomes will be specific to the stimulus. So if you train for endurance, your endurance will increase. If you train for strength, your strength will increase. But if you increase, but you won't get a massive increase in endurance. The further you are away from the strength part of the energy timeline, the less likely there's going to be a change. Not to say there won't be a change. There may be a minor change for a novice person who's never trained before, because all training is going to be good. But once that's going to diminish very, very, very quickly. I actually did a study when I was doing my master's, and it was a side study outside my master's thesis. And I got 2 groups of training. One group did super slow training, 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down, and the other group did normal traditional weight training. It's exactly what I'm doing today. 6 repetitions normal speed, or 6 repetitions on 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down. It was a 10-week study, and I measured muscle size and strength. And what I discovered in that time frame, I measured strength by a 3 RM exercise. So 3 RM is right into the phosphate system, expressing high amounts of force. And what I found is that the group that did the endurance slow time under tension training, they actually increased the weight that they were lifting for that 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down for 6 repetitions in 60 seconds. They got stronger in the endurance. They lifted but when I went and measured their strength back into the true measurement of strength, which is fastest muscle activation, maximal force generation over a short period of time, their strength actually decreased. And the reason why it decreased is because they weren't novice trainers. They were Olympic level athletes that I was training. So they started with high levels of strength because that's how they were always trained. Then I went on to this 10-week cycle of super slow training. Their endurance got better, but their strength actually went down because they weren't training that way anymore. So they actually got weaker rather than stronger, but they got more endurance in that specific type of training. When I compared them to the group that just did traditional weight training, then their strength went up as well, and their muscle size went up. The endurance set, the time under tension set, the slow trainers, their muscle didn't change at all. They had no change whatsoever. Their strength went down. That's probably because of neurological reasons. They weren't activating those neurological pathways so much anymore. They were driving slow, not fast, but they didn't get any loss of muscle size. They maintained the muscle size they had beforehand. However, the strength oriented increase in strength, the traditional, and increase in endurance. And that was also shown in Keogh's research published in Strength and Conditioning Research, which is very much a peer-reviewed, high-level research journal. So that's the time under tension, the super slows. Where could you use it? You may want to use it when someone's in rehab. So you need to get just basic movement back, a little bit of tension, get some range of movement. You don't want to lose heavy weights to put stress on the joint. You want to do it nice and slow, so you're always controlling the weight. So it could be very beneficial. in maybe rehabilitation, where you want to go back to basics, really get the technique right, get the form right, low levels of force, more control, and you're going to get some benefits at that level, whether it be rehab, maybe for a beginner. The other challenge I've found with it is that the set just takes so long. People start falling asleep halfway through. You're going, if you're doing a bench press, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. And after about 3 or 4, they go, is this ever going to finish? If you've never done it before, you get this incredible burn because it's slow. The lactic acid doesn't buffer out as fast or get milked out of the muscle as fast. So you get this build up of lactic acid, and if you're not used to it, you get this incredible burn. When I first trained back in the late 80s and early 90s with it, I found, wow, I'll get a great pump. That's all it was just a pump, and I soon deflated very soon after that without any extra benefits or results. So super slows, there's a nice evaluation. There could be some application for beginners or rehabilitation, but if you really want to go down the path of strength, then and increase in muscle size, increase your physiological changes in the muscle, then it may not be the best option for you, even though it is very, very safe because it's so slow. It's very hard to crash the car when you're doing 20 kilometres an hour on the motorway, but it's not going to get you where you want to be as fast as you want to get there. The other form of technique, and there are variations, 5 seconds up, 1 second down, 10 seconds up, 2 seconds down. And some people try to make a science out of sort of be 5 seconds up, hold it for 2 seconds, and then 7 seconds down. And they try to make the science out of it. But if you look at it and say, that's the best way to train, and you go, okay, well, where does it place it on the energy timeline? Then what does it do to the load? What does it do to the force? What does it do to the motor units? What does it do, whether it be fast or slow? So if you have that knowledge, you're going to see through all these proclaimed promises with training techniques. And you say, no, that doesn't make any sense. It's the best way to put on muscle size. Well, how can it be the best way to put on muscle size when you're expressing low levels of force over a long period of time, recruiting less motor units, less fast motor units? That doesn't make any sense at all. It's great for strength. Well, it's not. It's the exact, everything about it anatomically is the opposite to strength. There you go. Now, you could change it if you wanted to make it more strength orientated. Maybe just do 1 or 2 repetitions. So you increase the weight, still do the slow repetition, 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down, that's 10 seconds. So if you go with a really heavy weight, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down 2, with a really heavy weight that I can't do a second rep, then yeah, that's time, well, it's not even time under tension, you're just doing slow repetitions. Because the time under tension is now only 10 seconds, but it's only 1 repetition, which should ideally from a physiological point of view be similar to doing 5 repetitions at 1 second up, 1 second down, because the total amount still equals 10 seconds. But there's some good food for thought, isn't there? So the great thing with training techniques, when you have a good anatomy and physiology background, you can build that, because when you know your fundamentals anatomy and physiology, you can see through all the smoke screen of the noise and the claims and the promises and the, hey, they call it super and all this time under tension and maximal, whatever it might be. But really, when you look at it, it doesn't necessarily follow the rules of science. Let's have a look at another technique, which we call drop sets. Now, drop sets, you don't drop the weight because that's not good etiquette in the gym. Drop sets is basically I do a number of sets after each other with no rest in between. So what I'll do, I'll use 6 again as an example. I'm going to do this set here. Just say this is my best weight for 6 repetitions. So I do my 6, 5, I can't do any more, and I go to my potential, or some people call volitional failure or fatigue. I like to call it potential your best. So what you do then is you can't lift any more reps at that weight. So what you do is you take the weight off, or you have a number of dumbbells or barbells where you strip the bar, take weights off, with only a couple, just enough time to bring the new weight in, a lighter weight, to keep doing another set, ideally as many as you can, maybe around 5 or 6. That's a drop set. That's called a double drop. It means you drop twice. All right? A triple drop is where you drop 3 times. It means I do another set and I fatigue, and then I strip the weight even further, or get a lighter dumbbell, and now you could keep going if you wanted to, a quadruple drop, until you're virtually lifting a thimble because you're so fatigued. and you get an incredible burn, incredible feeling. You come out and you go, oh my God, man, I feel that. Yeah, well, that's really high intensity training. That's really high intensity. Well, first of all, when you look at that term high intensity in cardiovascular is measured by the higher the heart rate. The higher the heart rate, the closer to your maximal heart rate, which is normally measured 220 minus your age, that's the higher the intensity. So the faster you run, the steeper the hill, the higher your heart rate, the higher the intensity. But you can't maintain that for long periods of time. High intensity in strength training is the weight is closer to your 1RM or maximal voluntary contraction. So the heavier the weight and the closest to your maximal weight for one repetition, the higher intensity. So when you're doing a drop set, first of all, the first set of 6, yes, you're probably in that range of the phosphate energy system as discussed before, activating fast-twitch muscle fibers. The next set of sets, 6, that adds another 12 seconds of exercise, maybe another 2, another 12 seconds. So that takes you to 24 seconds. So that second set is out of the phosphate system. Now it's pushing you into the lactate system, and that's where you feel it in the burn. You go, oh my gosh, I feel the burn, I feel the pump, yeah, it's good. And if I drop it again, then I go at another 12 seconds. Now I'm way down into the 36 seconds into the lactate energy system. So the question is, what is the benefit of going from that phosphate system, fast-twitch muscle activation, and then jumping into the lactate system, and jumping further into the lactate system where I keep pushing the muscle, really I'm enduring the muscle. So if I look at that from a training point of view, from an anatomical point of view, and we already looked at what does it do. So yeah, the repetitions, it's increasing the repetitions, so you're increasing the timeline into the lactate system. What's it doing to the muscle under tension or load? It's increasing it. So I'm increasing the time of the load, a time that the muscle's under load by reducing the weight and keep going. Where is that on the energy timeline? That's pushing the stimulus down to the lactate energy system. What does it do? Is it activating fast twitch or more slow twitch? Well, you're going to activate a few in the fast twitch in the first set, but every set after that, you're going down into the slow twitch. So you're going away from what your maybe ultimate goal is. You're pushing it down into a space that really is not going to serve you or give you the benefit you want. You still get a feeling, but it's maybe just the wrong feeling. What happens to the weight as you do each set? The weight has to be decreased. If you decrease the weight, what does that do to the force? The force of the muscle generates is less, but more endurance. What does that do to the motor unit recruitment? The motor unit recruitment will be decreasing. What does it do to the amount of tension? The tension will be decreasing. Is it going to be more conducive to strength or endurance? Well, obviously it's now endurance. Is it high intensity or low intensity? Really, it's low intensity because the weight's dropping and it's getting lower and lower and lower as you drop the weight and do more repetitions. So even though drop sets are very common and they get this really, they make you really feel a bit nauseous because it's very lactate, a lot of lactic acid, people aren't used to that, they have a high lactate tolerance, and they go, oh man, I feel sick, God, but I got this amazing pump because the blood's going in there, the lactic acid's going in there, but by the time you get to your car after you work out, it's all gone back and you sort of get back and say, oh boy, that pump's now gone, so you better take a photo straight after the set if you want to make your muscles look bigger. But they won't stay that way because the muscle will grow physiologically based on the stimulus that is applied to it. And then we already know that ideally you want to be closer to the phosphate fast-twitch muscle activation part of the energy timeline rather than way down to the lactate. Where would this be applicable for? How you apply it? Well, if you want to promote muscle endurance, keep pushing that muscle, keep pushing the muscle, keep pushing the muscle for muscular endurance. So there might be a need, a justifiable need, if you're training for endurance to keep building up that tolerance of lactic acid, maybe like sports that are very interval orientated, that could be used. But the question is it best to develop lactate tolerance in the gym, or is it better to develop it on the basketball court doing the activities that you'll be doing in the sport, like doing what we call, it's not a positive word, death runs, they're very lactate oriented, or interval sprints on the football field, or interval punching sessions in the boxing bag. The better, you've got to ask yourself, is there a better way to do it than in the gym to build endurance? Now, there's no better place in the world to develop strength than in the gym because you have absolute control of the load and you can fatigue a muscle or take a muscle to its potential or to its best within that 10-second range. It's very hard to do that in a pool or on the track or on the football field because you're not going to fatigue a muscle. There's no load there. You can always do another stroke, you can always do another step, you can always do another run if you need to at a slower rate. But endurance, is it better to do specific endurance on the field, the court, the pool, the oval that you're performing, or doing in the gym? My personal experience is you're better off making it as specific as possible. However, you may supplement your training with some drop sets to promote muscular endurance or lactate tolerance, because you're building that tolerance. So that's called drop sets. There's double drops, triple drops. Next training method which you will come across is what we call supersets. Yes, just like Kman, Superman, supersets. And I don't know why they call them supersets. There's another term called giant sets we'll talk about. Now there's three different types of supersets. The supersets is where you do one exercise followed by another exercise with no rest in between. Drop sets is where you do one set, then you do the next set with no rest in between. Supersets is where you may combine two exercises. So I might do, for example, I might be on the bench, I might do a 2-arm bench press, with a barbell or 2 dumbbells, and I do as many as I can. So I might go to 6, 8, 5, and 6, and I'll put the weight down, and then I go onto the floor and I do push-ups as many as I can, which I may pump out maybe 10 before I fatigue. Normally if I'm fresh, I might be able to do 25 push-ups, but because I'm entering the second exercise, which is the push-up, after doing the bench press, means I'm fatigued neurologically, muscular-wise, metabolically, hormonally, and then I go down and I'm going to do less reps I would than if I'm fresh, and then I'm pushing it out like this. That's called a superset. A giant set is where you do a third exercise. So you do 3 exercises in a row, like a double drop and a triple drop. A superset is 2 exercises, a double drop is 2 sets, really 2 exercises, 2 sets, but different exercises. A giant set is you add a third one. So if you have a look at that principle, if I'm going to do 2 exercises, one after the other, obviously the first one, depending on the repetitions, is going to put me in the energy timeline, where I want. So if I'm doing 6 repetitions, I'm still in that strength, a little bit of endurance type safe zone there. If I go and now do, say, a barbell bench press, then I'm not going to lift as much weight as I would normally if I didn't do the first exercise. I'm going to have to reduce the weight so I can endure the muscle for another 6, 7, 8, 9 repetitions. So the weight's going to have to decrease compared to the potential weight I could lift if I was fresh, if that makes sense. So the second set's always going to be a substandard set from a weight or the performance point of view if I do it fatigued versus if I did it fresh, which means I'm going to have to reduce the weight. So if we go back to the criteria of what we talked about, does it increase the reps or decrease the reps? Well, I'm doing another exercise, so it's increasing the reps. So we're going down the energy timeline. Does it increase the muscle under time under load? Yes, or decrease? It increases the time under load, so it's pushing it out. Where's it placed on the energy timeline? Well, the second set, or maybe the third exercise in the giant set, then that's really pushing the stimulus down to the lactate energy system. So 6, 6, 6, or if I'm doing 10 repetitions, 10, 10, 10, I'm way into the 30-second right down. The first set is in the phosphate energy system, or close to the phosphate system, but every corresponding set of exercise that I do is pushing it into the lactate energy system. And when I go in the lactic energy system, I get the burn, I start to get the lactic acid, I get the pump, I get the feeling of, yes, I feel getting bigger and stronger. But ideally, as you already know, that's just the metabolic byproduct of anaerobic glycolysis, means breaking down glycogen, not in the presence of oxygen. So to do each corresponding exercise, compared to if I did the exercise by itself, fresh, what would happen to the weight? I have to reduce the weight to endure through the exercise and endure through the set of repetitions. So the weight's decreasing, therefore what's that doing to the force? The force is decreasing, what's that doing to the motor units? The motor units is decreasing, the tension is decreasing. So is that going to be more conducive to strength development or endurance? Well, it's going to be more endurance. The application of this, well, maybe you want to, your first set is your strength set, understand that, and you're not going to do this exercise again, so you want to get best of both worlds. You want to do some strength training, and you want to also get some endurance at the same time. So you do your first set, then your second set, maybe in a drop set, you're dropping the weight in the second exercise. So whether it be drop sets or giant sets, the first set that you do of the exercise is maybe more strength orientated, and every set whether it be the same exercise or different exercises, more endurance. So the application of that could be, again, as I shared before, you're trying to promote muscular endurance or lactate tolerance because of your sport requires that. Or you just enjoy that, you just want to get a bit of endurance and you just enjoy that training method and you want to say, oh, I'm going to give it a strength and a bit of endurance in the one set, in the one group of exercises, whether it be a drop set, a triple drop, or whether it be a superset or a giant set. So, but understand when you try to get the best of both worlds, you're not focused on one, you tend to, how can you say, reserve your energy for the drop set. And we'll talk more about that on the application of these exercises and how you can implement them into your training. So we've looked at pass-throughs, we've looked at supersets, looked at drop sets, and ideally this is giving you a good indication of how to evaluate different exercises or different training methods and techniques. There are things called force sets, force repetitions, and what that basically means, force repetitions, is I might do my 6, and I go to 6, I can't get it up again, and I come down, and I can't do another one, but someone helps me. You know, they help me through that sticking point. They just guide me through and they help me through it. Oh yeah, help me with another one. And they just put their hand on the weight, whether it be on the barbell or the dumbbell, and they just help you through, particularly through the sticking point, to force another repetition out. And that's all good and wonderful. Yes, and we'll talk about the psychology of that and all of these methods at the end. So that's called force repetitions. Force reps means I get someone to just help me through that concept, because I normally, remember, I always fatigue on the concentric, not so much the eccentric, because I can't get it up. But if I get it up, I can lower it down slowly. So I just want to get that extra repetition or extra negative out. Negative is an extra eccentric contraction. You know, whether it be bench press, I can't get it up, help me up, yes, bring it down. And I slow it down, help me up again, help me up again. So there are some safety issues there, as you can probably understand, because your muscles are really fatigued. Also, from a safety point of view, your stabilizers are very fatigued. So the stabilizer is trying to stabilize the glenohumeral joint or the lower back, whatever it might be. They're really fatigued. And if you keep, and the load's not changing, the load's the same, but you've been forced to do another repetition. So the muscles can handle it, the bigger muscles. But the smaller muscles, they're starting to fatigue a lot. And the smallest muscles are all your stabilizers, such as your rotator cuff, your multifidus, your transverse abdominis in the lower back, because you're only as strong as your weakest link. So the big links don't fatigue, they don't get injured. It's the little links that fatigue and are more likely to get injured. Most injuries come from the more stabilizing muscle groups in controlled movements. So just be careful that if you go down this path, then you're increasing we're pushing those weak links to their breaking point, even though the big muscles, you're not going to have a challenge such as the pecs and the quads and so forth, they'll be fine. But all of a sudden you tweak your lower back, or you aggravated the sacroiliac joint, or L4, L5, or you impinge the rotator cuff, your supraspinatus, or what it might be, and all of a sudden you're, oh my gosh. So remember, safety is really important, and the question there is, are you going to get any extra benefit by doing that extra force repetition? And that's certainly very much debatable. Yes, you've already gone to volitional fatigue or volitional potential, means you're going to your potential your best. And if you're going to push your car even further over the red zone, then it may go into the brake zone. And the question is, will you get any benefit, extra benefit, by taking that risk? It's always going to be a risk-benefit type equation. And for the general population, the risks are certainly not worth it. The higher the stakes, the higher the risk. So if you're competing for the Olympics or you're a front row in the All Black, you may want to train greater to that potential, because there's a greater prize if we're happy to push the body to that higher level. You better take that racing car to the peak so you can win the Formula One race, whatever it might be. But be very careful, because using that as a reasoning to do what you're doing is not a good reason. You know, any excuse from the extreme, an extreme example is not really a good example whatsoever. So an argument from the extreme is not a very good argument. Well, the Olympians do it, yeah, I understand that, but you find that Olympian what they're like when they're 50 years of age and their body's starting to cave in or fall apart from all the crazy training they did when they were young. And I see a lot of that because that was my space. I used to specialise in training those Olympic level, international level athletes. So when it comes to force reps, yes, again, that extra few repetitions is really pushing it into the endurance. The more force reps you do, the more endurance that you're pushing it through, but you're doing it now in a very fatigued stay with the same high load, it's going to increase the potential for injury. So yes, the force stays the same, the weight stays the same, but now you're getting external assistance to push that muscle past what it can possibly handle naturally, and you've got to be careful with that, because that could bite you on the backside through injury, because it's like taking a car far past its safe zone, and then things will more likely start to fall off. So that's what we call force repetitions. There are things people use eccentrics, means they focus on the eccentrics, and there's a number of ways to do the eccentrics. Eccentrics are I fatigue. I do a set to fatigue, and then what I do is I cheat the movement up, lift it up and lower it down, and then I use momentum to get it up and lower it down. So that's like doing force repetitions, but to do some more eccentric loads under fatigue. So you're using another body part to cheat it up and getting it down, and cheating it up and getting it down. So again, that's very much the same evaluation as force reps. It's force reps, force eccentric reps, because you're using momentum and other body parts to get to the concentric to lower down into the eccentric, because you want to do those extra eccentric endurance sets. And really, when you look at that, yes, you're pushing it more into the endurance zone. The load's the same, you're completely fatigued, you use momentum, and then again, I'm not going to repeat the obvious safety challenges or concerns or risks with that, because now you're using momentum on a fatigued muscle. The stabilizes fatigue. You've got a high chance of maybe injuring yourself, which is the number one rule: don't hurt yourself and don't hurt your client. And you've got to start to question, what are those extra benefits except for just feeling, oh God, I feel I've pushed my limit. It's a mental game. I want to see how much I can push my body. That's okay, but if you're not going to do that on your car every day, because that car's not going to last. You spend most of the time in the shop because you're pushing it every day, and it's not serving you well. It's not serving your life. A car that's broken down is of no value. A body broken down is of no value because you're trying to make it go faster. Ideally, you have to look at what speed that you need to take the car to live your life, and in our life it's 100 kilometres an hour. If it's a Formula 1 race, it might be 200 kilometres or 300 kilometres an hour, but they're going to be high risk. They'll go through cars a lot faster than us. They have many backup cars, as you already know. So they're looking at force eccentrics, using momentum. You can do force eccentric if someone lifts it up for you and you control it down. Same evaluation as I shared before. You can also do what we call super eccentrics. Now this is a very high risk type of training method, and basically what you do, if I'm on a bench press, for example, and I can lift 100 kilograms for one repetition. That's all I can lift. So that's my best. 100 kilos. I'm doing 100 kilos. It's nice and round. Can I lift 100 kilos now? Well, back in the day, I could quite easily do that. Not so much now because it doesn't serve my purpose. There's no benefit in my life to lift 100 kilograms. But if I could just do one, just get one out. That's like at 1 RM. So super eccentric is what you do is, instead of doing 100, you put 110 on, you get a couple of spotters, and you just go down, you just do a super eccentric where you just control them the way down. Because I fatigue in the concentric, not the eccentric, what I'm now doing is taking the body, so I'm going to fatigue on the eccentric all the way down to maximize muscle tension and bring it up and maximize. But again, remember the safety zone I talked about. When you're lifting a weight that is too heavy for you to lift, then that's going to increase the stress in the joints. It's going to increase the stress on the ligaments, the cartilage, the meniscus, the tendons. And yes, I've played around with this and I found that my joints hurt for quite some time after. But you do have elite Olympic lifters or powerlifters or elite athletes play around with it. My suggestion, as you can see my little puppy dogs here, come to benefit me. Hey, little Brutus. That's a very hard one to justify because of the risk benefit. And the research has shown no real benefits of doing that. It's just that you're increasing more fatigue, more stress on the body and the joints. So you got the eccentrics. My suggestion is go to your potential, doing a good, safe, controlled set, because safety is the number one. Now, I talked briefly about supersets before, and there are 3 different types of supersets. I mentioned just supersets doing the same muscle, so I might do squats and then go and do some alternative dumbbell lunges, or I might do a leg press and do some squats, or I might do a seated row with chin-ups, or I might do bench press with push-ups. That's the same muscle. You have another one called PHA supersets, peripheral hard action supersets, where I basically do upper body than lower body. I might go and do some chin-ups, then I do some squats, and then I do some push-ups. So I work my back, I work my legs, I work my chest. And I just do all three without a rest in between. And I guess those types of training methods are used sequentially in circuit training. So I do my upper body, and I want to keep moving, so I go and do my lower body. And while I'm doing my lower body, my upper body is recovering a little bit. Then I go and do my upper body again. And while I'm doing my upper body, my legs are recovering. So that is a typical setup in a circuit. I don't just do push-ups, dips, bench press, because I'm just going to burn out if I just do those three in a row. So PHA supersets are used in circuits where you've got a whole bunch of exercises executed sequentially. You have to put a bit of thought in not just the, you want to make sure they get the best out of the exercise, not have too much of a carry effect of one exercise to the other. That will affect the benefit of the intensity of that exercise. So that's where PHA means peripheral heart action. You go upper, lower, upper. Peripheral heart action basically means you're shunting blood to the upper, and then when you work your legs, you're shunting blood to the lower, because the body tends to do that. With vasoconstrictor where it doesn't want to go, and vasodilate where it does want to go, and it goes up, and it's supposed to give you a bit of a cardiovascular effect. And all training is going to give you some benefit. So circuit training, that could be used for that. The other thing it could be used for is if you're, and I've done this many times myself, I just don't have time to do a long workout. I don't like long workouts at all. So I'll just go and do, for example, when I train a rowie here, I have a chin-up bar and a dip, and we got a good set of kettlebells, 28 kilogram kettlebells, they're a good weight. And rowie will do chins, she'll do dips, and just do a set of dumbbell squats. And the workout's done in less than 5 minutes. Not too much time resting in between. Just go 1, 2, 3, boom, get it done, get the stimulus. And obviously we're not training for elite sport or elite performance, but that's plenty enough for us to get a good workout in a short, brief time, because a lot of the workout is wasted time where you're waiting in between sets, where I have to wait for to rest for my next set or my next exercise. Most of training is waiting. Get rid of the waiting, construct the exercises in a way that you can time effectively do them to the level of performance that you need to do them for your goal or your life, maybe not to the elite, but to the level that will serve you well, that will save you a lot of time, because in this time-starved society, the number one reason why people don't exercise is because I don't have time. So looking at all of those, they're just some examples of alternative overload techniques. Use those principles which I share with you to evaluate the exercise. First of all, safety. Is it safe? That is vital, because an injured person is not going to be a training person. When I'm injured, I'm not training, I'm not competing in my beloved sport of martial arts, and I'm not even participating in life as much as I'd like to, and I'm injured. A car in the mechanic's shed is not a car that you want. You want it out on the road enjoying life. Doesn't mean you have to go and push that car to 300 kilometres an hour. You can have a great life doing 100 to 150 kilometres an hour, 150 maybe in the autobahns in Germany, but not so much here in New Zealand. So is it safe? Is it increasing the repetitions or decreasing the repetitions? So if it's increasing the repetitions, it's likely that's going to change where it's on the energy timeline. Is it increasing the time the muscle's under load, or decreasing the time the muscle's under load? Because the more time under load, the lower the load's going to be, because it's going to push it down to the lactate energy system. Where does it place the stimulus on the energy timeline? More towards strength or endurance, phosphate or lactate, or even cardio or aerobic. So have a look at that. Is that type of training going to be more conducive to activating fast-twitch muscle fibers or slow-twitch muscle fibers? Well, in life we need fast-twitch muscle activation, because slow-twitch get used all the time. So does it force you to increase the load or decrease the load? So if it's decreasing the load, because you have to lift it over a longer period of time, it puts it into the lactate system, or increase the load. Does it increase, if the load's decreasing or increasing, does it increase the force or decrease the force? If it's decreasing the force, then that's not conducive to strength, that's more endurance for a long period of time, or increasing the force. Does it increase motor units or decrease motor units? Does it increase tension? Does it decrease tension? What are the metabolic byproducts? Do you have this lactic acid build-up or this burn? If that's the case, then that's a close in the lactate energy system. There's some good things to look at. Is it more strength conducive or endurance conducive? And then you look at what are your goals, and what do you have to do to get those goals, to make that physiological change to your body, to increase quality of life, or sporting performance, or putting on muscle size, or changing your body shape, whatever it might be. Follow the anatomy. follow the physiology. Follow that and you will not get sidetracked and led down garden paths, other people's garden paths which are full of promises but no real substance to the promise. There's just lots of feelings and emotions, and you've got to be careful. You have to use your logic, and today is all about logically helping you to evaluate the benefits. Now, if you do want to implement some of these alternative overload techniques, because many of them are quite mentally draining, because you've got to push your body and you get that lactic acid. You know, say in athletics, the hardest track event is a 400 metre, because you just have to train so hard to endure through that lactic acid. You know, Usain Bolt, the greatest sprinter of all time, when he was younger, he was a 400 metre runner, and he's more biomechanically designed for a 400 metre runner. He's tall, he's got long limbs, so he's got good stride length. But he couldn't stand the training. You know, if you ever read his book, which is about, he wrote his book about his journey, he hated the training for 400 metres. So over time he went back to 200, then he went down to 100 because he didn't want to do those massive lactate tolerance type training methods because he didn't like the feeling of it. So he brought down to the 100 and became the greatest 100. But he would have also been the greatest 400 metre runner because biomechanically he's probably more set up biomechanically for that anyway. So there's that lactate type tolerance type training in those sets, and that lactate tolerance, that burn, that pump, that's not intensity. Remember, that's actually lowering intensity and during that low intensity over a period of time that builds up the pump, the blood flow, the lactic acid, the burn, the feeling, the emotion. And many times if you attach that emotion and you attach it to building muscle or getting stronger, then you're attaching the wrong emotion to the wrong anatomical process, because strength and power and muscle size, you don't get so much of a lactic acid burn. You get more of a stimulus of activating more motor units and muscle fibers to get increases in strength and eventually muscle size. However, if you do want to go down that path, because many of them you know what you're going to put in, so before you start you know the hell that you have to go through to get to the end. The challenge you possibly have with that is that if I'm going to do a drop set and I know I've got 2 more sets after it, then I'm more likely subconsciously going to pace myself in the first set. And then that first set's going to be compromised because I'm thinking about the second set and the third set. The old saying, the more I give you, the less well you do it. You know, you can train hard or long, but you can't do both. You know, you can train with quality or quantity, but you can't do both. The more the quantity, the less the quality. Not just physiologically, but also psychologically. Because remember, strength is very much in the head. So if I know I just got 1 set to do my best, then I'm more likely to put all guns firing. Mental focus, energy flows where focus goes. You know, I'm going to get in there and I've only got 1 shot at it. But if I know I've got 2 sets after that, then I'm more likely to not quite put my best into that first set, to save a little bit of energy for the second set, and even save energy if I'm going to do a triple drop, or there'll be a giant set, 3 exercises in a row. So just be aware when you know that you're going to add all these extras. If I say, for example, I'm going to take you out to a 100 metre track, and we're going to do 15 100 metre sprints, and I want you to put 100% into every one of them. Knowing that the first one you got 14 to go, do you really think you're going to put 100% into that first one? I don't think so, because subconsciously you're thinking, I have to get through 15 of these, therefore I'm going to hold myself back to endure through all the extra 100 metre sprints, to endure through the drop sets, to endure through the giant sets, whatever that might be. So just be aware is that when you do these, many times you actually pace yourself through. So you actually decrease that first set, which we know from a physiological point of view is the most important set, because that's the set that is closest to the phosphate energy system and the fastest muscle activation and the developing strength, which is where you get your greatest physiological change and strength and muscle change rather than muscle endurance. So be aware that when you do this, you're going to pace yourself. And the other thing is, if you're training someone, if you're a trainer and you want to train someone and you want to apply some of these into your training, and you better have good justification why you do that, because remember, your client is paying you for the best results and the best use of their time with the less chances of injury. So if you can't justify it, from a anatomical point of view that directly links to their risk benefit to their goal and the safety issues, then you best not do it. But if you can, you're going to use these. Don't tell them what you're going to do. You know, so we're going to do bench press, then we're going to go and we're going to drop down to do some push-ups. Because when on the bench press, guess what they're thinking about? They're thinking about the push-ups. So what's going to happen to the performance in the bench press? It's going to subconsciously be down, and they're going to have a substandard bench press followed by a substandard set of push-ups. So substandard, two substandards don't make a great standard. You're better off just getting rid of the push-ups and just say, let's do the bench press to you 100%. That's going to be better than doing, two half efforts don't make a full effort. Two less potential sets don't make a potential set. Two less don't make a great. However, if you are going to do that, when you do the bench press, don't tell them you're going to do the push-up. Don't tell them you're going to do the push-up. Surprise them. So they've got 100% in here, and then you do the push-up. And the other thing is, if you're going to do it, don't do it all the time, because if you do it all the time, they'll get a gist of what you're doing. Oh, we're doing bench presses. I know we're going to do a drop push-up straight after this. So subconsciously, they know what you're going to do. So they subconsciously pace themselves through it. And the purpose of strength training is to focus on your best set, your best potential effort. Don't take away from the focus of their best by adding extra layers of stuff that are diminishing. So with all these extra sets, drop sets, giant sets, super slides, all you're doing is you're going to get diminishing returns. You eventually will just overtrain because you're pushing your body to fatigue and this high repetition. You hit training plateaus, and eventually your performance will go down, and eventually you'll end up possibly with injury. So use them sparingly, not all the time, because if all the time they're predictable and they're high repetition, and high repetitions means repetitive strain injuries on tendons and joints and cartilage. So repetitive. So remember, be careful of how much you spin the wheels in the car, because you'll burn out the tread. You only spin the wheels when it's going to be of benefit, but don't overdo it. You will overcook the turkey. Make sure it's perfectly cooked. Don't overcook it. An overcooked turkey is not the best turkey to be serving on Thanksgiving's Day or Thanksgiving's evening. Also, if you're going to put these into a training program or a training session, don't do it at the start. Do it at the very end of the session. So if you've got a certain number of exercises you want to get through with good quality, good performance, taking people to their best or to their potential, don't fatigue them at the start. You want to get all the best sets out, and then you may want to do one or two of these types of exercises, would be drop sets or giant sets at the end, where after you've done the main sets or the main exercises that you get the main benefits from. So don't put them at the start. If you're going to do them, finish the session off with these as a goodbye gift, as a little lactic acid burn or a little muscular endurance for them. And also be very aware, be very careful that when you go and push through this zone of extra endurance or pushing the muscles past what they normally do, would be 4 sets or negatives or drop sets or giant sets, be very strict on technique, because when they're fatigued, then their muscles fatigue, their stabilizers are fatigued, therefore they can't stabilize the joints as well as they could or should. Therefore they're going to be a greater susceptible to injury, wear and tear, stress on the joint. And when people are fatigued, they will tend to try to possibly cheat or use momentum or alternate their technique to squeeze the set out, and that is when you have that high chance of injury, where you compromise technique, form, body posture, stabilization. So everything's fatigued. So you're going to be very careful that you maintain perfect technique. When you're doing, you're better off doing less reps better than more reps poorly, that will lead to a poor result, particularly when you get injured. So when you use these techniques, if you're going to use them sparingly, use them with purpose. You have to justify them and implement them without letting them know, so they don't pace themselves. That way you can at least maintain the quality of the first set of the drop set, the first set of the giant set, or the first set of repetitions before you do any force reps or negatives. So don't tell them, keep that as a surprise, and the best way to keep it a surprise, don't do it very often, so when it does come, they are surprised. But most importantly, what I find is a lot of these training techniques, they have lots of promises, there's lots of activity, there's not a lot of productivity. Sometimes the productivity is down because you've got too much activity going on. Stick to basics, that way you never have to go back to basics, and the basics will give you all the results that you want, and most importantly, safely on the Kmax.